you will very rarely drive your electric vehicle below 70 to 80% of its battery.
Talking about unpacking the 2022 AutoTrader Electric Vehicle Buyers Survey. Now, this was conducted obviously in South Africa, and essentially I want to find out from George Mienie, who is the CEO of AutoTrader, whether or not South Africans are warming up to the idea of electric cars. Hello to you, George.
Hi, Shéila. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Good. I'm great. Great to be here.
Lovely. So I want to get smack into the middle of the conversation, but I'm going to start off with just finding out what your survey was focusing on.
So, Shéila, AutoTrader is South Africa's biggest automotive marketplace. We operate at scale with 12 million visits, 80 million pages a month being open. So we can get consumer perception, expectations, purchase intent, awareness data very quickly. And that's what we did with this EV buyer survey in South Africa. And it's the third time running, so we've done it 3 years in a row. And partnering with the Smarter Mobility, our objective here is to get those perceptions of consumers on electric vehicles so that industry stakeholders such as dealers, manufacturers, and marketers, and even government bodies can understand what the reality is. Because at the end of the day, the end user or the consumer is going to be the driver of these vehicles. And so to help not make decisions in a vacuum.
Lovely. Now, the 2022 Electric Vehicle Buyer Survey by South African online automotive show initially spoke of the cost being one of the biggest barriers that people are experiencing. What else are we finding that people aren't too satisfied with?
So when we started this 3 years ago, we call it the trinity of electric vehicles in South Africa. And that is cost was the biggest factor in that in order for us to reach scale in South Africa with electric vehicles, we have to have an electric vehicle in South Africa that costs under 500,000 Rand. At the moment, we're not there. The cheapest, or should I say the most cost-effective electric vehicle is the Mienie SE, the electric, which goes for 740,000 Rand at the brand spanking new. So we're not there for the 500,000 Rand mark. The second part of that trinity was range anxiety, or range, I call it now range, or the opposite of range anxiety, which means that you're confident about range. And we try to turn consumers from having range anxiety to having range confidence. That was the word I was looking for, range confidence. Yes. And we've seen in the survey that a lot of consumers are less concerned about range in electric vehicles versus what they were last year and the year before. So that was a second thing of the trinity. The third thing was charging infrastructure. And along with charging infrastructure, obviously the word load shedding has to be spoken about. But with charging infrastructure, there's less concern about charging infrastructure in South Africa. And because of the education that's gone on, people have realized, or potential electric vehicle owners in the future have realized, that 90% of the time you're actually charging your vehicle at home. So charging infrastructure, while it exists in South Africa with more than 300 chargers in our network, in the public, most of the time you don't have to destination fill like you do with a petrol vehicle. You don't go to a garage to fill it. You do it in the garage in the convenience of your own home like yourself.
Lovely. Now, there was a shift in sentiment, particularly with this sort of trio that you spoke of in terms of the surveys. Talk to me about that shift in sentiment.
So cost has become even more important to consumers. And, the cost has shifted slightly to the right in terms of consumers are more willing now to spend a little bit more than 500,000 Rand on the EV. And the reason is because we've been so good at educating consumers in the running costs of an electric vehicle. The running costs of an electric vehicle, if we take a normal everyday trip, I personally drive a Jaguar I-Pace, which is a full electric. I can't be speaking about these things without actually having taken the plunge.
Lovely.
But if we take my Jaguar I-Pace as an example, on an average week, you could be spending or doing anywhere north of about 1,500 kilometers, and that could cost you up to about 6,500 Rand per month. Sorry, 2,600 kilometers could cost you about 6,500 rand per month. When you drive an EV and you move away from petrol at 2.50 per kilowatt hour, which is the rate the municipalities charge, you save roughly 4,500 rand per month on that 6.5. So your bill comes down by about 70% in the running costs of an electric vehicle. And so because of this reduction in running costs, consumers are more and more warming up to the fact that electric vehicles might be more expensive up front, but very, very cheap to run.
Wow. I want us to get into a break, but when we get back, we're going to be unpacking the realities. And I think I want to give you the platform, George, to be able to school us a bit more on electric vehicles, because the reality is that with the current crisis, and I'm speaking particularly about load shedding, I would have thought that people would pull back, but I absolutely love the conversation you're introducing where people are keen. They're a bit more excited to hear about the developments in the world of electric cars. So all that when we get back.
The Upside, taking the African perspective to fresh levels.
You heard right. This is The Upside. Shéila Ndikumana with you, and I'm not alone. We're having a conversation around electric vehicles, and I'm really excited to be talking to George Mienie, who is AutoTrader's CEO, and he joins us on the line, truly to educate us about the things we don't know, the misconstrued conceptions we have around electric vehicles. Now, George, what are some of the things that people are misunderstanding altogether when it comes to electric vehicles?
Well, I think one of the biggest misunderstandings, Shéila, is load shedding. It's probably the thing that comes up the most with electric vehicles, and it's formed part of a lot of memes around, oh, you got an electric car, and now the power is off. But the reality is that you don't drive an electric vehicle like you drive a petrol vehicle. And what I mean by that is most of us are very naughty as car consumers. And that is we fill up the car and we drive it until the light is on. We don't drive an electric vehicle in that way. And the reason, one of the fundamental reasons is because of the no need to destination fill. There's nothing wrong with driving a petrol vehicle that way, but when you get home at night, simply plug the car in and charge it. So in saying that, you will very rarely drive your electric vehicle below 70 to 80% of its battery. And I pull into my garage each night with no less than 70% of the battery left. And in doing that, because I do maybe 40 kilometers a day, maybe 50 or 60 kilometers a day, and in doing that, I plug my electric vehicle in, maybe at 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night, and by the time I wake up the next morning, which, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, a good 10 to 12 hours has gone by, and to charge 20 to 30% of an electric vehicle's battery takes you nearly 2 hours, maybe 3 at the most.
Oh, wow.
And so you can see that even if you have 4 hours of load shedding in a 10 to 12 hour stint, you're still going to get your 2 to 3 hours of charge, and your car's going to be full when you wake up.
That's fair. Now, I want to talk about the third survey, the third edition of the survey, which also highlighted early adoption of electric vehicles and people decreasing their interest due to them realizing the battery life is not as strong. Now, you made mention of charging it for 2 to 3 hours, and you're using this car for 40 Ks per day. Talk to me about perhaps how that could be a misconstrued understanding.
So there's a couple of things in what you just asked, Shéila. The first is battery health. Now, these lithium-ion batteries are the reason electric vehicles are becoming as popular as they are, and that's because lithium-ion is the most energy-dense power source for electric vehicles that we've come across on the planet. But the misconception is that they don't last long.
Yes.
And that's just purely, or should I say, directly untrue. Most of these batteries in these electric vehicles have warranties from anywhere between 7 and 10 years. And if you look at the number of charge cycles that a lithium-ion battery can go through, the lithium-ion battery will more than likely last longer than a petrol engine in an internal combustion engine vehicle. If you look at the number of charge cycles, driving the electric vehicle for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, which probably will go further than a petrol-powered car. So that's the first thing, is the misconception around the battery of the electric vehicle. Now, the other thing we saw in the survey was consumers seem to be putting off their purchase intent. So what I mean by that is they seem to be delaying the onset of the purchase. We asked a question which was, will you be buying an electric vehicle in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years?
Yes.
Last year, there were more people this side of 3 years or this side of 5 years. This year, there are more people the other side of 3 years or the other side of 5 years. And we think the reason is because there's a middle step occurring because of the cost. Most electric vehicles, as I mentioned earlier, are north of 500,000 rand. Because of that cost, consumers are seeing a middle step towards electric vehicles, which is the hybrid. Now, a hybrid is a combination of a electric motor and a smaller battery. And the Toyota Cross is an example of a hybrid, a mild hybrid electric vehicle, where you get the benefits of both worlds. You get efficiency as well as you get the use of the petrol engine for long trips, and you don't have to necessarily plug it in and charge it. So, but the biggest reason I think hybrid is the middle step is because the Toyota Cross costs in the mid 400,000. Now, that's under the magic number of 500,000.
Yes. Yes. I see that. Now, let's step onto a more attractive end of electric vehicles. And I'm hoping by this that you will sell me the idea as well. So what does a successful and attractive electronic vehicle subsector look like in South Africa?
So, I mean, the reality is, Shéila, that by 2030 in some countries, European countries, and in most by 2035, those countries will not accept internal combustion engine vehicles as exports from South Africa any longer, or anywhere in the world for that matter. They are hell-bent in putting electric vehicles into Europe at 100% rate from 2035. Now, if you just rewind a little bit and you look at South Africa, 60% of our vehicles are exported to the UK and Europe. That we manufacture locally in this country. So our local demand can't sustain the amount of manufacture that we have. And so goes the subsectors like component manufacturing or even component usage, like parts and supplies, because that's what I'm assuming you're talking about in terms of subsectors.
Yes, yes.
So if you take an internal combustion engine, a car, it's got 2,000 moving parts, and there's lots of components there, which a lot of people fear is going to become history. But the reality is that it's going to take us approximately 30 years to transition the entire country, 8 million fleet of cars, to electric vehicles. Sure. It's not going to happen at 2035. Remember, at 2035, all new vehicles sold have to be electric. Not every vehicle driving on the road. And so there is this window of opportunity to transition component manufacture, the component subsectors, into other things. Now, there are other things involved. For instance, electric motors are an electric vehicle. That is a component.
Yes.
What about batteries? We don't know how battery technology is going to advance. At the moment, it's advancing incredibly quickly. That's a component. Braking systems, windscreen wiping systems, windscreen, you use it all the time more than likely. When you want to clean your windscreen, you pull the little lever behind the steering wheel. That's a component. So many of the components that are in cars at the moment, besides the engine, will still continue to be manufactured.
Yes. Yes. Wow. So this is all we have time for, George. As you were talking, what popped in my head is that this is just more job opportunities, especially for other components that aren't in production as yet, because we don't have existing or a mass amount of existing electric cars in South Africa. And so it just looks like a brighter future, in my mind at least. And I hope you're with me on this one.
Absolutely with you. I'm an ever optimist, and we should not hold ourselves back. As South Africa, we are innovative, we are resilient, and I think this is more of an opportunity than it is a setback.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time, George. Absolutely appreciating your presence on the show.
Great stuff. Thank you.
That was the voice of George Mienie, who is an AutoTrader CEO, or rather AutoTraders CEO, really helping us unpack the 2022 AutoTrader Electric Vehicle Buyers Survey. And some interesting finds were made in this survey. I want to see what's going to happen in the next 10 years when it comes to electric vehicles. I don't know about you, but I'm truly excited.
That podcast was courtesy of Channel Africa, the African perspective.